This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
A season on the brink. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper in the corner. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and a touchdown night again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And the leaping interception by Woodson. Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good. He's 5'7", 179 pounds. A junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. My name is Steve Dace. Thank you so much for joining us here on YouTube. If you're catching us for the very first time, please consider subscribing to our channel, helping us to spread the word, liking this video, giving us positive reviews. I try to respond to as many of the comments each and every week as I possibly can. So give us your feedback on today's commentary, this week's episode, because we love to see it, as well as when you subscribe to our audio podcast only version via iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. Again, good reviews help us to get the word out about what we're doing here at Michigan Podcast. That's where you guys come in, and we greatly appreciate it, as well as all of you that support us on our Patreon page each and every week as well. You can learn more about that at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And then finally, a weekly thank you to our partners over at Detroit Sports Podcast, which help us to get the word out each and every week about this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at MichiganPodcast.com. I'm sorry, that's the website, MichiganPodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. And if you go to MichiganPodcast.com, you don't ever miss any episodes or anything we have ever done. All of them are archived and cataloged for you there as well. Well, given what happened on Saturday, I decided that I was going to fly solo here this week, because I think a lot needs to be said, and I just think that it might be best this week if I'm the only one who says it, so that we don't ask any of our esteemed guests who are kind enough to join us here each week on our YouTube channel, put them in a position where it may kind of hurt what they do, answering certain questions. We're not really that intimately involved with the Michigan program, so we don't necessarily have to risk any relationships in going certain places that I think we as fans probably need to go and need to discuss. Because the loss we suffered against Michigan State, it's one thing to lose to Sparty. Let's face it, if you're a Michigan fan, we've been enduring way too much of that over the last decade. And I can remember seasons where Michigan State broke our hearts. I go back to 1990. We're number one in the country. Desmond Howard has clearly interfered in the end zone. No call on Eddie Brown on the pass interference. We lose by 1 point. We end up tying Michigan State, Illinois, and Iowa, four-way tie for the Big Ten that season. I remember one of the years I was a student at Michigan State. Yeah, I went to school at Michigan State. I just rooted for Michigan the whole time I was there. Man, when they beat us in the rain there at Spartan Stadium in 1994, I think it was, or was it 90? It was 93. It was 1993. We had just won at Penn State in the first meeting between the two teams. That was Penn State's first year in the Big Ten. We go to Sparty, lay an egg. I think it was 17-7, something like that in the rain. Man, the phone in my dorm room at Wonders Hall ran and rang and rang and rang. People I didn't even know knew who I was, man. Just knew that I was that Michigan fan on campus. I had to take my phone off the hook for days after that. All right, so we've been through some crushing losses to Sparty. How about 2 years ago when the punter drops the ball? So sadly, we've been down this road before. But I think there's something about this loss that is particularly concerning. And it's what I want to open up this week's episode talking about. And I want to start with tweets like this. This is from Mike Sullivan at 97.1 The Ticket, the monster sports talk station in Detroit, who notes that through 31 games at Michigan, Harbaugh and Brady Hoke essentially had the exact same record. Now, this is a cool sports talk radio hot take, talking point, and I used to do sports talk radio for a living, so I get it. It, of course, provides no clarity, no context. I saw Mike Farrell at Rivals.com tweeted earlier today that Butch Jones at Tennessee has a better record in the last 9 games than Jim Harbaugh. Well, Jim Harbaugh has a better record this season than Butch Jones. What the hell does that mean? Answer, nothing. It means nothing. These are dumbass hot takes by people looking to sound too smart, too clever by a half. Now, Mike Sullivan says he's a Michigan fan. I'll take for granted that he is. But the difference in the way the program looks now to the way the program looks under Hoke, come on, man, it's just not even close. It's just not. It's like saying Ohio State fans are disappointed in Urban Meyer because he only has one Big Ten title in 6 years. He came into the season 61-6 in the Big Ten. These are examples of why people hate what we do in the media. Right? Because these are examples of pushing a narrative and pushing a hot take and talking points as opposed to a substantive debate. Now, this does not mean Coach Harbaugh and the program are above criticism. And, we will have some this week on the episode. But I wanted to bring this up from the outset today because it's how I want to open the show about why I think this loss is so potentially damaging to Michigan. What really was at stake here for the Wolverines. So let's discuss. To me, what's going on here is a battle of narratives. And when Coach Harbaugh largely built this program on his ability to build a brand narrative, more so than meaningful wins, well, if you live by the narrative, you can die by the narrative. And I think we do need to discuss narratives because I think what this loss is prompting is this question. Did we hire the next Bo Schembechler or the next Marty Schottenheimer? Let me give you some perspective. When Bo took over the Michigan program in 1969, Michigan had won only one Big Ten title since 1950, guys. 1950, we're currently undergoing the second longest title drought in program history. The longest was the one Bo Schembechler inherited. Yet, in his very first year, he won the Big Ten. He'd go on to win a total of 13 Big Ten titles. Now, Bo never did win a national championship. We had a different postseason back then. For example, 3 of the best teams he ever had from 1972 to 1974, their combined record was 32-1. Yet, according to Big Ten rules, they were never permitted to play in a bowl game. So Bo had several teams, including those teams from 1972 to 1974, that likely would have made the 4-team college football playoff format if we had it back then. Let's take a look at Marty Schottenheimer. When he took over the Kansas City Chiefs in 1989, the Chiefs only had one playoff appearance since 1972. One playoff appearance in 17 years. Schottenheimer reinvented that franchise. They made the playoffs in year 2, and then 7 of the next 8 seasons. That was a great run by Schottenheimer. However, despite top 10 in winning percentage among NFL head coaches, Schottenheimer could never win the so-called big one. In fact, Marty Schottenheimer today is still number 7 all-time in wins in the NFL. But he never even made a Super Bowl, let alone win one. In fact, you could say he was kind of the Gene Katie of the NFL, if you guys remember him. One of the greatest coaches of all time who never made a Final Four. There is no question Jim Harbaugh is a very good coach. It's not debatable. And as we go through this episode today, let's make one thing clear. There is no one else we could realistically get I want as our head coach. I wore number 4 as a kid because Jim Harbaugh was my all-time favorite Michigan football player. When the old NCAA football game was still being made and I used to create myself as a player, I always gave myself number 4. And then when I had a son, Noah, who's now a big Michigan fan, who also, because he loves Coach Harbaugh, likes to wear number 4, I would make Noah instead of me, and guess what number I gave him? Number 4. Right? So I know we live in an era right now where everything, whether it's sports or politics or anything else, is an instant binary choice. Everybody, you're either with me 100% or he hate me. I get it. You're either the hostess with the mostess or and the horse you rode in on. That I know that's the world in which we live. I live in another world. It's called adult world. And even though it tends to alienate many of you, I like where I live more than I like many of you that get alienated. So I'm going to live there, whether you like it or not. When we're criticizing, I'm not saying fire the coach, guys. I love our coach. We dropped out of the top 10 this week. It's the first time Michigan's been out of the top 10 this season. Last week was the 19th time we've been ranked in the top 10 since Coach Harbaugh took over. We weren't ranked in the top 10 a total of 19 times combined in the decade prior to his arrival, 2005 to 2014. So he's worth every dime. He's worth every dime. But the question still stands. Do we have an elite coach? Marty Schottenheimer was a great coach. He's the 7th winningest coach all time in the NFL. But he wasn't a championship coach, and so far, neither is Harbaugh. Again, there's no one else I would realistically want as our coach. But I don't think there's any doubt. We are at a crossroads now as a program. When you look at where we are, the question is this. Are we going to be a perennial 8 to 10 win team, or are we going to be an elite program? Now, for those of you that are saying, whoa, Dace, time out, man. It's year 3. It's year 3. Well, let's look at history, and let's look at the now. There's an interesting stat about Notre Dame football. Every coach at Notre Dame who won a national championship won one in year 3. And if he didn't win one in his 3rd year, he never won one. Rockne, national championship, year 3. Frank Leahy, national championship, year 3. Ara Parseghian, national championship, year 3. Dan Devine, national championship, year 3. Lou Holtz, national championship in 1988, which was year 3. Brian Kelly went to the national championship game in year 3, but didn't win it. No Notre Dame coach that did not win a national championship in his 3rd year has ever won one in the history of that program. Now let's look at the now. When Chris Peterson took over at the University of Washington, the Huskies had one season of 9 or more wins in the decade prior to his arrival. In fact, in 2012, Washington was 0-12, guys. Last year was Washington's 3rd season. The Huskies won the Pac-12 and made the college football playoff. Nick Saban in his 3rd year, 2009, won the SEC, won the national championship. Urban Meyer in his 3rd season at Ohio State in 2014, won the Big Ten and won the national championship. Now, some of you are going to say, oh, come on, those guys inherited tougher situations than Jim Harbaugh. Well, or Jim Harbaugh inherited tougher situations than they did. Well, that might be true at Ohio State for sure. I mean, they had one 6-6 year when they fired Jim Tressel and were on probation, but they were fully stocked. I mean, Tressel had the best program in the Big Ten when he was canned. So I'll buy you on that one. But Alabama, if you look at their decade prior to Nick Saban's arrival, it looks an awful lot like Michigan's, actually. You look at Washington's decade prior to Chris Peterson's arrival, Michigan's was actually better, and we were averaging barely 7 wins a season. But hey, if that's the game we want to play, how about Penn State? How about Penn State? Did our coach walk into a situation where there was a child rapist raping children, marauding as a child rapist on campus for decades you had to dig out from? No? Yeah. That's a tough one. That's a pretty tough situation. Stifling NCAA sanctions. The previous coach, realizing he couldn't really rebuild this program, took the first train to Clarksville, left town to the NFL. It's Bill O'Brien. Does anybody want to make the case James Franklin got an easier situation than Jim Harbaugh? Really? Now, I'm a Jimmy Slappy, but I'm not going to deny reality, guys. By the way, last year was James Franklin's third year. They won the Big Ten championship. So I don't think it's too early to ask this question at all. Are we going to be a perennial 8 to 10 win team, which is really good? That's kind of what we were under Lloyd Carr, and he's in the College Football Hall of Fame now. Or are we going to be an elite program, meaning year in and year out, we're in the conversation? In my opinion, right now, there's enough evidence to suggest either outcome is possible from here. Now, Jim has largely rebuilt Michigan on brand narrative. He has masterfully played the media, promotion, and it's worked. Because he hasn't built it on signature victories. Like Bo had his first year against Ohio State, for example. The problem with building it on brand narrative, though, is that rubber band can snap back. And now the same media that was building Harbaugh into mythical status is now reversing that narrative, like we saw from Mike Sullivan or Mike Farrell. So Mike Sullivan, a local media guy in Detroit. Mike Farrell, a national guy for Rivals.com. When you don't follow up narrative with significance, eventually, if you live by the narrative, you will die by the narrative. The rubber band of the narrative will snap back. When that happens, there's only one way out of this. The only way to reverse the reversal of the narrative is with signature victories. And the ball is in Harbaugh's court right now. I go back to Penn State and James Franklin. At this time last year, we were beating Penn State 49-10. At this time last year, James Franklin was calling a timeout to kick a field goal on 4th and goal from the 1.5 to avoid an embarrassing shutout. And we were wondering, who's the next coach at Penn State? How did he reverse that narrative so fast? Well, on a Saturday night in Happy Valley, he got a signature win against Ohio State. And the only game the Penn State Nittany Lions have lost since then was an all-time classic Rose Bowl that went down to the wire against USC on January 1. That's the only way out now. Signature victories. Jim has won a lot of games. His 30-game record at Michigan, the only coach who has a better one since Bo, was Gary Moeller. It's even better than Lloyd Carr's, who, again, is in the College Football Hall of Fame now. But not all victories are the same. Some games are more significant than others. What is lacking is a signature win. Beating Indiana this week, which will not be easy, by the way, not the way we're playing offense, we'll get to that here in a bit, that will quiet the storm, but it will not reverse the brand narrative. Now, Jim is too good of a coach for us to suck. We're not going to suck, guys. So the Brady hoax stats, come on. Be smarter than that. Does anybody watching this think that Jim's record in years 5 and 6 at Michigan will be the same, or the years 4 and 5 will be the same as Brady Hoax or Rich Rodriguez? Come on, nobody does. So don't pee on me and tell me it's raining, okay? But we didn't hire Jim Harbaugh to be 10-3. It's a different era now. You know, when Lloyd Carr had a lot of 10-3 type of seasons, and we would go down and win an Outback Bowl or a Citrus Bowl and finish 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th in the country. Well, back in those days, we had the convoluted BCS system. Only 2 teams played for the national championship. You could still share a Big Ten title. You know, we shared a Big Ten title in 1998 with a 10-3 record. You know, you could do that back then and still get a championship ring, and your fans were happy. Well, we don't live in that era now. Now we have a college football playoff where 4 teams make it. And since it's 4 teams every year, that really means 7 to 10 fan bases think they have a legitimate shot. It's not just 2, 3, or 4 teams now as we had in the BCS. Also, you can't share championships anymore. This is what Urban Meyer is learning. He's had an incredible run at Ohio State, but only one team wins the championship now. No more shared titles like Lloyd Carr had in 1998 with Wisconsin and Ohio State, like he had in 2004 with Iowa. We don't get to do that anymore. Like he did in 2000 with Northwestern and Purdue. We don't get to share titles anymore. There's one champion. Everybody else is, the first loser, according to the great prophet Ricky Bobby. That's where we're at. So 10-3, sharing a Big Ten championship, beating an SEC team in the Outback Bowl or the Citrus Bowl. For those of us that remember that era fondly, like me, if you're my age or older, those were great years. We got Big Ten championship banners. We bought, Big Ten championship shirts. 10-3 doesn't mean the same anymore because it means like what happened last year. You're not in the Big Ten championship game, and your bowl game is cool if you win it. If not, it's really just a meaningless exhibition. It's not a meaningful season anymore. And that's what we hired Harbaugh to do something about. And that's why we have a certain floor we won't go beneath. He's recruited too well. He's too good of a coach. But we don't want to be 10-3. We want to be Clemson. We want to be Alabama. We want to be Ohio State. We went out, paid top dollar for what we thought was a mercenary coach. We're given him private planes and all kinds of fringe benefits we never provided to Michigan coaches in the past because we thought, frankly, we're too cool for school. We're the Harvard of the Midwest. We don't have to do those things those other schools do to win. Well, we're doing them now. And when I say those things, I'm not talking about cheating. I'm talking about using your fully armed and operational battle station at full capacity. We're doing those things now. And we're paying a coach $9 million. We're paying an offensive staff about $12 million for this season for the anemic performances that we're going to be breaking down here in a few moments. We could have gotten a lot of coaches that could have taken our facilities and our brand and our tradition and our national recruiting base and gone 10-3. Brady Hoke went 11-2. Hell, he can't even keep a job now as an assistant. Goes to Oregon, they all get fired. Goes to Tennessee, they're all going to get fired. All right? So Al Borges, is he even working in college football right now? He was the offensive coordinator for an 11-2 team. 10-3 doesn't mean what it used to mean in 1999, in 2004. It doesn't mean that. Nowadays, if you're 10-3 and not in your conference championship game, it's really not any different than going 8-4, 7-5. Recognizing that, we got ourselves the best coach money could buy and gave him every tool at his disposal to help us become Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And when you have losses like we had on Saturday night and the whole nation is watching, and it's really embarrassing to watch, where our offensive line cannot execute basic blocking schemes again, where we are throwing the ball 20 times in a monsoon with a backup quarterback for reasons only Allah knows. Well, if you want to be Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, you need to recruit like them. And that's why a loss like that on Saturday night, that's where you go from being that program to being an 8-10 win Lloyd Carr type of Michigan. Because those guys could go to Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And they're like, dude, you're going to lose like that. I'll go to Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. Now, the next guys we're going to get aren't going to be scrubs. They're going to be really good. Maybe even pros. Look at Jordan Lewis, Jake Butt, all those players we just put in the National Football League. But there's a difference between loading up your roster with guys that are going to be 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round picks in the NFL to guys who everybody agrees are 1st round picks in the NFL. And when they fall to the 2nd round, they're crushed. And when you lose games like we did on Saturday night in that spotlight with all those recruits there, with the 1997 national championship team there, that is the kind of loss that if you don't compensate for it later on with a signature win at Penn State, at Wisconsin, home against Ohio State, you lose those recruits. And they go to Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State instead. And that's the difference between being elite and winning 8-10 games and being really good. That's the difference between being Bo Schembechler or Marty Schottenheimer. Are you looking to put the ball in your court, your actual court, like this sweet maize and blue Jumpman backyard court? If that's you, Sport Court of Michigan has you covered. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, give them a call. Based out of Michigan, ready to install your court sooner than you might expect. Now, if you're in the Southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Just visit his website, sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you're outside of Southeast Michigan, you need a hoop for your driveway or your yard, he's got you covered there at monsterhoops.com. That's monsterhoops.com, and they'll ship those right to your door. Now, if you go to monsterhoops.com, you mention Michigan Podcast, you're going to save $100 on a Monster Hoop. That's monsterhoops.com, mention Michigan Podcast, save 100 smackaroos. Now, if you go to sportcourtmi.com, though, and you get one of those awesome backyard courts, and you mention Michigan Podcast, you can save up to $1,000 on your backyard court, depending on the package you select. So, monsterhoops.com, sportcourtmi.com, mention Michigan Podcast, save some money when you do, and tell them Michigan Podcast sent you. This tweet from Angelique Shengelis of the Detroit News, I think, is a perfect encapsulation of where we are right now and why we have a season on the brink. We're almost halfway through the year. Look at these national stats. Michigan is 92nd in passes intercepted, 106th in fumbles lost, 115th in tackle for loss allowed, 118th in sacks allowed. That's Brady Hoke 2014 bad. I would guess we might be the worst offense in terms of total statistical profile in a Power 5 conference this year, halfway through the season. So those of you that are like, hey, remember Penn State this time last year? Nobody thought they were any good. They went on to win the Big Ten championship. Hey, this time last year, we were firing Clay Helton at USC. He went on to win the Rose Bowl. Okay, well, two things happened at those two schools. At Penn State, what happened is they caught lightning in a bottle with Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley. And that reinvented their program after the win against Ohio State, which was kind of fluky with block kicks. What happened at USC? They found this kid named Sam Darnold on the bench, put him in, and that transformed their season. So for the trajectory that we're on right now to change, because, guys, we've seen the same game every week this year. In every game this year, there's been a Michigan turnover at some point in the first half that has thwarted all of Michigan's offensive momentum for the rest of the half from there. That has happened in every game this year. Every game. Happened again on Saturday night with Ty Isaac's fumble. We've seen this in every game. In every game, we've been able to consistently protect our quarterback. We've seen that in every game. In every game, our coaches make halftime adjustments, and we shut the other team down and outscore them and dominate them. That happened again on Saturday. We outscored Sparty 7-0, and then we had the monsoon. We were outscoring opponents 87-14 in the second half this year. We have seen, though, the same game 5 weeks in a row. That will not produce what USC and Penn State had last year, where they reinvented themselves in the second half of the season. That statistical profile we just saw from Angelique Shengelis is only going to be reversed, depending on the answers, to the following 5 questions. These 5 questions are going to determine the season. Number 1, were our expectations just too high? Well, Michigan's really young, Steve. Michigan State started 12 guys with freshman eligibility. They won. They didn't turn it over 5 times. They were 3-9 last year. So I don't think expectations were too high at all. Weren't too high at all. I mean, we were number 11 in the preseason AP poll with a coach making $9 million a year. I don't think expectations were too high, guys. So I wanted to lead off with that because you're lying to yourself. That's self-delusion if you buy into that. Expectations were not too high. Don't tell me, well, Tariq Black got hurt. So you mean to tell me our entire offense broke down because a guy who's played 1.5 games, a true freshman who's played a game and a half in his Michigan career got hurt? No, that's not why. Expectations were not too high. Get rid of the excuses, okay? Get rid of them. This comes to our next question, number 2. Is it time for Brandon Peters? In my opinion, the answer is yes, and I say this as someone that has been holding this debate at bay. Well, Steve, why don't we make sure we're out of the Big Ten race before we make that move? I'm not willing to concede the Big Ten race. That's why I want to make the move. Have you seen that defense? Because statistically, our profile might be the worst offense in all of the Power 5. Defensively, we might have the best defense in all of college football, Power and Group of 5. Our statistical profile on that side of the ball is out of this galaxy. I mean, that defense is on another astral plane. And when you consider how dominant they are with how bad the offense is, the offense isn't helping them out. I think the most yards Michigan State got off of Michigan's second half turnovers on any of the ensuing drives on Saturday night was 9. 9. Several of those turnovers, they got a total of 3 yards. That's why I think the time for Brandon Peters is actually now. Because I think we could win a championship with this defense if we just have a competent offense. Competent. We have a kicking game and a defense that I think is national championship caliber. I think it's time to make the switch because I don't want to concede this season. Now, we're not going to win a championship if we don't win at Penn State. Well, I'd kind of like to see Brandon Peters play a game on the road against Indiana before I throw him into a whiteout against a top 5 team. How about you? Now, if you just don't think he's ready to play yet, I respect that opinion. It's been mine for a long, long time. I think, though, it's time to find out after he's been on campus for 22 months if he's ready to play. Because it's clear the other quarterbacks aren't. It's clear they don't have the ability to raise the overall talent level of the offense. I'm not one for normally making the argument, how worse can it get? But when you're having 5 turnovers and John O'Corn is trying to go all Demetrius Brown 1987, it's time to ask, how much worse can it get? I think it's time to put Brandon Peters in the game. And I think it's time to find out what he can do in a winnable road game before we ask him to play some more difficult road games later on. Question number 3, why is the offensive line bad? It's just bad. I don't know. Here's what I do know. We're going to shell out about $12 million this year for an offensive coaching staff producing that statistical profile from Angelique Shengelis we shared with you a few minutes ago. $12 million this year for that. We don't execute basic blocking schemes. I would urge everybody, I don't want to give it away because it's premium information. And the Wolverine, the people over there have been good friends to the Michigan podcast. So let me just say this. Go to thewolverine.com. Go find Chris Ballas's podcast with former All-Big Ten Michigan lineman Doug Skeen. And just listen. And then make sure there are no sharp objects in the immediate radius when it's done. Because he doesn't pull any punches. And it's painful to listen to. But it comes from a guy who's been in the trenches, who knows what's going on, a guy who was a good recruit but not a huge recruit, who was all Big Ten but not all American, didn't play 10 years in the NFL. So Doug Skeen was not a guy that was just going to blow you away with his physical superiority. He wasn't Orlando Pace, wasn't Jeff Backus or Steve Hutchinson, guys who were first-round draft picks in the NFL. This was a guy who had to be a master technician to maximize his talent. So he's pretty good at breaking down our breakdowns, and he's going to do a better job of it than I can. So I will just urge you to go listen to that at thewolverine.com and then find a pillow to cry in. Question number 4 that will determine the trajectory of the season, where's the leadership on this team? Now, when everybody's underperforming, it's tough to have leaders. When your 5th-year senior running back just goes out there and fumbles in midfield from not even a helmet on the ball, but a basic strip, what's he going to say? Chris Evans might be the most talented running back in the program. He's had a fumble problem this year. What's he going to say? When your quarterbacks keep throwing the ball to the other team, are they really the guy you're listening to in the huddle to come back and tell you, hey, guys, we got to execute? Probably not. You know, when Mason Cole's getting out there beaten by a walk-on for Michigan State, ain't like he can go back in the huddle and yell at Michael Onwenu and Nolan Aluzio for giving up 3 sacks again this week. So we have systemic problems offensively, and when everybody's underperforming, there's no one that can really step up and take command. And so I don't know what the answer to that question is. I don't. But this one right here might be the most important question going forward for the rest of the season. The 5th and final question is, what's a reasonable expectation for this season now? We've got 4 road games. We haven't been a great road team in many, many years. We will overwhelm Rutgers at home, likely overwhelm Minnesota on the road or at home. That's 6 wins. So that's your bowl eligibility. Maryland, I think our defense will probably win that game with them down to their 3rd-string quarterback. So that's 7 wins. Now we have Indiana, Penn State. Indiana has played us very tough the last 2 years, down to the wire. Penn State will be a big underdog. Wisconsin will be a big underdog. Ohio State will be a big underdog. You got to beat Indiana this week by any score. Don't think it matters which one. And then I think we have to come out of this season, if we're not going to win the Big Ten, one of those signature 4 games Michigan has to win. Has to. If we come out of this season and we don't have any signature wins, if you think the media narrative is bad now, it's going to get dialed up to 11 the next 9 months. And that does have a big impact on recruiting when you're trying to recruit the level we need to recruit at. This week's Big Ten Power Ratings, which I really don't want to do, but I don't want to be those punk fans that when your team loses and you're crushed, just acts like, you're just going to forget the season's still going. So we'll do it. Rutgers at the bottom, Northwestern. I can't believe it. I got a Pat Fitzgerald man crush, but they're bad, man. I mean, they're just bad. That was bad football on Saturday. Wisconsin at 12, Minnesota at 11. Tough opening to the Big Ten for them, but I think they're going to get Sparty on Saturday. I think Minnesota's backs against the wall kind of game. Catch Sparty on an emotional letdown after a big win against Michigan. Get him at home. I think you'll see Minnesota upset Sparty on Saturday. Nebraska at number 10 with a brutal fourth quarter implosion against Wisconsin. Indiana, our next opponent there at number 9, coming off their first shutout in a decade, although it was against an FCS foe. Maryland destroyed by Ohio State for the second straight year. Purdue up to number 7. They're on track for bowl eligibility in Coach Brohm's first year. Iowa at number 6. Michigan's number 5. Sparty's number 4. And then the clear top 3, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, which will be number 1 in my Big Ten Power Ratings until somebody beats them. Now, if I had a vote this week in the AP poll, I'd keep West Virginia in there. They have 2 quality losses away from home against TCU and Virginia Tech. Navy moves in, South Florida, Virginia Tech. The Fighting Scott Frosts, man, are just taking names. By the way, the teams we've beaten, Air Force is 1-4. Florida just lost at home 17-16 in an ugly game on a missed extra point. I just mentioned Central Florida. They annihilated a Cincinnati team that took us to the fourth quarter. So we got a ways to go on offense, guys. A ways to go on the offensive side of the football. Rest of my poll, Michigan I dropped to number 19. Sparty at number 17. I don't know why pollsters have Michigan State behind Michigan when we just played and they beat us. That makes no sense to me. What do I know? NC State, number 15. Wisconsin at 14. They just still haven't beat anybody, but they look good, though. When you're playing nobodies, Wisconsin looks the way you're supposed to look. I'll give them that. Miami with a huge road win at Florida State, breaking that near decade of futility against the rival. Washington, Ohio State. Auburn, I have at number 10. USC at number 9. Oklahoma with a huge loss to Iowa State. But again, why is Ohio State ranked ahead of Oklahoma? I believe, did they play? Yeah, I get it. I know why Ohio State's ranked against Oklahoma. They didn't play this year. We have no way to, they did, so. Well, they played at Norman. It was a tough game. And Ohio State, no, they played in Columbus, and Oklahoma opened a can. So I don't have an answer for that. Makes no sense. That's why I didn't drop Oklahoma that far, because I can't rank Ohio State ahead of them. They played, and Oklahoma State kicked their butts. So there you go. I'm sorry, Oklahoma. Notre Dame at number 7. I think Notre Dame is really good. Really good. Washington State at number 6. My top 5 teams, if I had to vote in the AP poll: Penn State, TCU, Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson. Those would be my top 5 teams if I had a vote in the AP poll. And if I had to submit my Heisman Trophy ballot this week, Saquon Barkley remains at number 1. Bryce Love, though, at Stanford, he's coming in the rearview mirror, and he's coming in hot. Still averaging over 10 yards a pop. That's crazy. Baker Mayfield drops to number 3. This week's Twitter poll question at Michigan Podcast, and I wanted to see how much confidence was shaken after Saturday night's inexcusable loss to Sparty. Well, it appears a lot, because when I asked you, do you still believe Jim Harbaugh will win a Big Ten or national championship at Michigan, barely a plurality said yes. If I would have asked this question on Friday, I think it would have been at least 80% yes. So a lot of us shaken by what we saw against Michigan State because it's a confirmation of what we feared we were watching all season long. Now, again, let me clarify before you send in the haterade. We're not saying Coach Harbaugh sucks, but we're wondering, are we going to go back to being Lloyd Carr, Michigan, which is pretty good? We'll take that over the last decade. I don't know about you, right? That's 8 to 10 wins, perennial top 25 team, a lot of times or several times a top 10 team. Or are we going to be elite? Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, they're the elite programs right now. Florida State, who has kind of a star-crossed season you have every now and then right now. I think that's where the doubt is. I think there's doubt that he's going to get us to that status. And I don't know that that's inexcusable after what we saw with that inexcusable loss, because I have, for the first time since we announced Jim Harbaugh on December 28th, 2014, for the first time, I have my doubts we will be an elite program. This week's question of the week comes from Brett Robinson, who asks, how do you not blame that on the head coach when you play like that coming out of a bye week? I'm with you. I mean, if you watch that game and you watch the way, dang it, my voice is giving out. Let me just read that question again. This week's question of the week coming from Brett Robinson, who asks, how do you not blame that on the head coach when you play like that coming out of a bye week? I don't know. I'm with you, Brett. You watch that game, you watch the way Michigan State played with composure on offense, played relentlessly on defense. We're over there turning the ball over 5 times. You know, it looked like Sparty was coming off a bye week. Not only was Sparty not coming off a bye week, guys, they were coming off of back-to-back physical slugfests against Notre Dame and Iowa. We were coming off a bye. And before that, we played Air Force, Cincinnati, and Purdue. So there's no good answers to your question, Brett. You asked a good question. And these questions get asked with more tenacity when you pay a coach $9 million a year. But hey, I know it looks bleak right now. I know it looks bad right now. I know our maize and blue daubers are down right now. But as we close out this week's episode, at least we're not Kansas. Look at this video. This is one of the saddest college football videos you'll ever see. This is the Kansas victory walk before their game against Texas Tech on Saturday. And when you take away all the cheerleaders, there's nobody there, man. That looks like a funeral procession from Dickens' Bleak House, bro. So, better than Kansas. There's that. Go Blue. Hopefully next week will be better. At this point against Indiana, I'll just take a win. Any win. Because it won't be easy down there with the way we're playing offense. We will have an instant reaction podcast for our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. We'll see you next week.